The night was motionless and dead, as if the whole world held his breath, expecting something terrible. I stood at the window of my room, a tiny, almost locked space, where every sound broke the silence, like an acute watching watch in an empty room. The heart was beating so loudly that it seemed that the whole house could hear him, all this community around which my world was built. My hands were trembling, and I could not force myself to look away from the street, where the void stretched behind the fence, cold and inaccurate. I was afraid. I was afraid that it seemed that fear squeezes me, strangles, did not allow me to breathe. But it was not a fear of what could be seen. It was a fear that lived inside me, like a deep crack, breaking through my soul. He had no shape, had no face, but I felt it every moment, like a beast, ready to rush out. Around me are people who seemed familiar to me, but at that moment I realized I do not know them. I don't know myself. I knew the rules, I knew prayers, I knew the prohibitions, but I did not know who he became. I was a captive, but even in this captivity I was not sure that I had at least a drop of freedom. All that remained was a quiet hope, hidden behind the mask of obedience and humility. The sounds of steps at the door tore my thoughts. I retreated abruptly, my heart jumped in my throat. Someone was knocking. Not just knocking. The door creaked and the cold wind burst into the room like a harbinger of storm. "It's time," a quiet, even voice sounded. He was he, a mentor, a man who held power over me, who formed my thoughts and fears. His eyes glowed with calm, but in this calm, the cold and ruthlessness were hidden. I nodded, unable to say a word. A different voice was beating inside me, a voice who shouted and begged to run, resist, and not give up. But this voice drowned out for many years, where every step and thoughts were given an order to obey. I left the room, feeling the severity grows in my chest with every step. The path to the exit from the house is like a way through the labyrinth of fears and doubts, through many years of false promises and manipulations. Each door was clapping behind me as a sentence, and behind the walls I heard quiet voices, whispering, which turned into a threat. At that moment I first realized that salvation is not just a flight. This is an internal battle, a war with oneself, with those chains that keep you captive of invisible shackles. I took a few more steps along the corridor, and for a moment it seemed to me that the walls are narrowing, crushing from all sides, as if trying to squeeze out even the last drops of will from me. The whole community seemed to be a living organism, breathing through each window, every gap observing and controlling. There was not a single corner in this house where you could hide, not a single cache where you could hide your thoughts. The mentor walked nearby, calmly, without unnecessary words. His face was serene. This serenity seemed to me a mask hiding the iron grip that he squeezed my life. I wanted to scream, run, break the walls, but I knew that it was pointless. Fear, he was too strong, and the rules were too cruel. At that moment, I remembered how it all began, how I came here, into this closed religious community, with the hope of finding answers, peace and light in life, which has long turned into chaos. I was young, naive, and every voice, every word seemed to me true truth. I believed that I found my house, that they would accept me here and teach me to live correctly. But gradually the light went out. I began to notice how my thoughts change, how together with time, the feeling of my own person disappears. My fears, doubts, desires, everything was suppressed, replaced, silent. I became only a shadow of myself, a part of a mechanism controlled from the outside. Sometimes I caught myself trying to remember who I was before crossing the threshold of the community, but the memories seemed ghostly, as if disappearing in the fog. Who am I? How do I feel? Why do I live? These questions became forbidden, and attempts to look for answers are dangerous. The mentor stopped at the massive door, and Tui felt my heart beat even more. He looked at me, and in his gaze I read not just an order, but a sentence. I knew that now everything would change, that now a new stage of my struggle will begin, a struggle that I had not yet the slightest concept. He gently touched my hand and said, "You are ready. It's time to take a step. You are no longer a boy who can be directed. Now you should become part of something more, part of the truth." I nodded, unable to say a word, but inside me the spark was already starting to wake up, weak, trembling, but not disappearing. A spark of doubts, hopes, and desires to live for real. At that moment, I first felt that salvation is not only a flight from the outside world, but also a struggle with myself, the struggle that I still had to win. The door opened with a quiet creak, and I stepped inside, into the space where the walls were covered with dark wooden panels, and the air, the thick smell of wax and incense. It was the main meeting room, a place where fate they decided and revised, where voices sounded, forever changing life. A group has already gathered inside, faces with cold, tired eyes, as if burned with fire of strict rules and endless expectations. They looked at me, and I felt their views piercing me through, as if each of them tried to look deep inside, read every thought of my thought, and evaluate whether I was worthy to go further. Their silence was heavier than any scream, and the presence was menacingly dense. I recalled the voice of the mother, who sounded in childhood, warm and full of love, a voice that I could hardly remember, as if lost in the past. It was hard to believe that once I was part of this world, where there were laughter and joy, and not endless subordination and fear. "You must leave everything that was before," came the mentor's voice, and I felt like words like blocks of ice fell on my heart. "All doubts, fears, desires are obstacles on the way to truth. You are here in order to become a pure vessel, without the past, without connections." I closed my eyes to hold tears, and the picture flashed through my head. I, a little boy playing in the park, is free, brave, laughing without looking back. This picture was like from another life, distant and unattainable. But now, in this cold room, where every gesture and word were considered and carried power, I began to understand. What I considered salvation was a trap. The chains are invisible, but they squeezed me stronger. Every minute spent here brought me closer to the time when I had to choose, to accept this new reality or take a chance to everyone to find a way out. And this choice was terrible, not only externally. It meant the struggle with himself, with his fears and doubts that accumulated like waves, ready to wash away everything in their path. I felt how small fire was burning inside me, a fire of doubts and hopes that was banned, stopped, but which could not be repaid. It was my inner voice, my secret escape from the world that me captivated. The understanding of this struggle, this fire, was the first step toward salvation. The path that was just beginning, full of pain, betrayal, and unexpected discoveries. I stood in the shade for a long time, listening to the quiet echo of my own thoughts, which every day became louder and more persistent. Inside me, a storm of doubt and anxieties flared up, which could not be suppressed by anything, neither prayers, nor tired rituals, nor cold glances of the elders. Each new day in the community was like a step on thin ice, which could crack at any time, dropping me into the abyss of hopelessness. They not just controlled our bodies, they wanted to capture our souls. They inspired me that my desires and feelings are a sin, that doubts are an enemy of truth. But every day I felt how deeper in my heart, the resistance, quiet and timid, like a small sprout breaking through the cold earth. I remember one night, when the whole house was quiet, I secretly went outside. The sky was clear, strewn stars, and cold air cut his face. I stood under this endless arch, feeling at the same time free and terribly lonely. In the distance, the barking of dogs was heard, and at that moment I realized for the first time, freedom does not always come with bright flashes. Sometimes it comes in the form of a quiet, but adamant desire to be herself. This moment was for me as a glimpse of light in a long tunnel. I realized that if I do not start fighting now, then I can lose myself forever. But the struggle was not simple. I could not just leave. There were those around me who looked at me as a traitor, who was ready to break me into pieces in order to maintain their power. Each step towards freedom was accompanied by the fear of being caught, abandoned, forgotten. The memories of the family became sharp knives. I thought about her mother, about her warm voice and tender hands, about how I once dreamed of returning home, to a world where you can breathe freely and not be afraid of shadow on the wall. The internal gap became more painful. On the one hand, a community where I was locked, where the rules are iron chains. On the other hand, a call to life that tore me from the inside. One night, when fear and despair reached the peak, I heard a whisper. Not the voice of a mentor, not strict instructions, but a quiet call inside me. It was a call of life, a call of struggle and hope. I began to look for ways, small cracks in the walls of my imprisonment, where you could hide my secret, my dream of freedom. This dream was my last hope, and I held on to her despite everything. Days and nights merged into an endless stream of fear and secret hopes. I learned to mask my thoughts, hide internal doubts for impeccable humility. Every look, every word of the mentor, I absorbed like poison, but at the same time, I was looking for a way to preserve myself alive inside. There was no place for weaknesses in the community, but it was they who became the key to survival for me. Memory often returned me to childhood, to the house where there was freedom, even if it seemed simple and invisible. I recalled conversations with my mother, her soft voice, her kind eyes, full of light and warmth. These images were my secret power, which I am assured deep down, like a precious stone hidden from prying eyes. Once, during the next meeting, when all the participants of the community bent in humble prayer, I felt something bursting inside me. The heart was beating with renewed vigor. Breathing became sharp and intermittent. I suddenly realized that I could no longer play this role, the role of a thoughtless novice, deprived of the right to my thoughts and feelings. I looked around and saw that many of them, my brothers and sisters, were only a shadow of themselves, people who drowned in the abyss of fear and submission. Their eyes were empty, and their faces froze in masked humility. And I realized, if I stay here, I will lose myself forever. That night, when everyone fell asleep, I secretly collected a few things. An old photo of my mother, a small collar with food, and a couple of warm things that I could find. My step was quiet, almost imperceptible, but my heart was beating like an enraged animal ready to break free. The exit from the community was like the crossing of an invisible border between the two worlds, the world of fear and the world of hope. I knew that behind, a long-term prison from vows and rules, and ahead, unknown and freedom. But it was this unknown that was a real salvation for me. My legs trembled when I stepped on the cold ground under cover of night. The silence was deafening, but for me it was like a song of liberation. With every step, I felt how the chains of invisible shackles weaken, how a new fire flares up inside me, the fire of freedom. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, full of trials and fears. But now I was ready to fight for my life, for my right to be myself. My steps seemed echo in the night. I ran, not looking around, not thinking about what would bring tomorrow. The wind whistled in his ears, the cold struck his face hard, but I did not care. Freedom was not just an idea. It was a feeling that pulsed in every movement of my body, in every breath. I remembered each crack in the walls of the community, every look of a mentor, every word that once seemed true, but now it sounded a false song. I knew that they would look for me, that they would follow me and try to return back to this cage out of fear and submission. But I could not return. Behind his back there was a world that broke me, which took my soul from my soul. Ahead was a new world, cold, alien, but free. The first morning after the flight, I was on the outskirts of a small city. The streets were full of unauthorized persons, noisy and engaged in their affairs. I felt lost, like a child who first went into a big and unfamiliar world. The memory of the house where I grew up was intertwined with memories of the gloomy place in which I lived in recent years. Everything was so contradictory that it seemed as if my mind could not stand it. In the early days, I was hiding, afraid to trust people. My hands trembled when I tried to explain who I was and what happened to me. But few understood. The words seemed insufficient, and the story is too unusual and terrible. Sometimes at night, I dream of a community, its cold walls, loud voices, ruthless rules. These dreams are like chains that they do not let me forget. They remind you of how easily you can lose yourself, like a thin line between light and darkness. But every day I learn to live anew. In small steps, often painful but persistent. I began to go to support meetings, where I met people with similar stories, those who were also able to break out of the shackles, who also fought for the right to freedom. There I realized that salvation is not only a flight from a physical prison, but also the struggle with internal demons, with memories, with fears that do not disappear immediately. I learned to forgive, for fear and weakness, those who caused pain, and the world that seemed so alien and hostile. The path was long and difficult, but now I knew the main thing is not to give up. Live really, breathe freedom, which begins inside, even if there are still many shadows around.